Hey there folks. So in this video what we're going to be doing is looking at taking what we've got so far, which is our character, using a blend space for idle, walk, and in this instance as well run, and we're going to look at adding onto that things for jumping, because at the moment if we press up we just idle out, but also we can move because we've got our X and Y velocity. Here we've got walking, so we're going to look at how we can actually do this so it is a jump, and then obviously when we're falling down we use a fall animation, possibly then going into a landing animation that then blends back into our idle, walk and run. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do here is I've gone into my animation blueprint for my character, and you can see I've got this one state machine that's running, and inside there we've got our blend space. This is our ground locomotion. Now I could put jumping in here, but it's kind of going against the whole point of what I'm creating here, of this being only for handling ground. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do something that allows me to take the values and take the outputs of this ground locomotion state machine here, and then use them or combine them and blend them between other state machines. So I'm actually going to take this and I'm going to disconnect the connection. So I just held down Alt and clicked on the connection there, and I'm going to drag off of this and I'm going to go to cache. So new saved cache pose. So I can actually kind of save it as a variable and say whatever this pose is that's coming out of this calculation here, save it into this pose here. So we'll go with ground loco pose or ground loco cache. Let's go with pose. And that is now available for me to keep on reusing, potentially for blending with other animations, or even just, connecting it up in here. So I won't connect it up in there for very long. I'll just connect it up just to show you that it is working. But what I want to do now is I want to create a new state machine, and this one is just going to be, let's just go with general locomotion on this one. And this is going to be a combination of the ground locomotion and things like jumping as well. So here I'm actually going to replace this cached one with this locomotion one. Now if I actually compile here, we're going to have it go back to a T pose, because remember there's nothing in here. But what I can do is if I double click and go into that locomotion one, I can create a new state, and we'll call this one ground locomotion. And in the previous one, in the ground locomotion, we used the blend space. Well, in this one here, I can actually use that cached pose. So let's go with our ground loco and get that pose. So here, when we default into here, it'll go into the ground locomotion state machine, and it'll go into whatever cache is in there. But if we do anything else, we can go into any other states, and this can be our safe point to revert back to. So nothing's actually changed. If I look at this structure here where I've got my my cached pose, I've got a second state machine for general locomotion, and if I go in there, it's using the ground loco cache inside of that. So nothing's actually changed in terms of the outcome, but we've changed the way that it's all set up, ready to work. Okay, so the next thing we're going to need then is we're going to need some new states, and those new states are going to be handling jumping. Okay, so if I go and have a look in our content browser at the animations, you can see we have got a jump animation. We've also got a landing animation, and we've also got a falling animation, so a looping animation here. And these are the ones we're actually going to be using here. We're going to look to go directly into fall if we were to fall off of a building or a ledge. If we press jump, we're going to go directly into jump. But if we go into jump and then we start going downwards, we're going to need to loop into falling. And then when we land, no matter what's happening, we're going to go into the falling, and then we're going to go directly into the landing animation, and then back into our ground locomotion. So there's quite a lot of complicated stuff going on there, but let's actually start thinking about how we can do that. I'm going to start by creating two states. The first one's going to be called jump start, and I'm going to create another state, and this one's going to be falling. And I'm going to connect those two up to each other because I want to know when jump start has finished, let's go into falling. Well, how do I go from one to the other? We could click on this transition rule, and there's a very nifty little tick box we've got here, which is called automatic rule based on sequence player. Let's just move it over so you can see the whole rule for it in state. And that basically means when the first one finishes, automatically go into the second one. So it is very useful. We can tick that, and then that'll basically say as soon as whatever animation's in here is finished, automatically follow this transition rule into the next one. Yeah, so you see that it says auto rule. We don't have to actually go in and do a transition. You've also got another option. If you double click on it, you could look at the animation that was coming before it. So I could do get relevant, and you can see we've got relevant anim length, anim time remaining. And for these, we've got time remaining fraction. So we've got a whole bunch of really useful kind of stuff here. Time remaining is going to be a number. It's okay, but obviously different animations are going to be different lengths. And do we want to say, I want to get it when it's 1 second or 2 seconds? With the time remaining fraction, what we can do here is we can say how much time is remaining of that animation. Well, if it is less than or equal to a value, so we can say a percentage value here, we can say let's transition into the next one. Now, what percentage value might we use? Well, 0.1 would be 10%, 0.2 would be 20%. So in this instance here, I'm saying if this animation that was coming before it, Jumpstart, has less than 20% of it left, then let's go into this transition, which will allow us to start blending from Jumpstart into falling. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to start having a look at then is actually putting these animations in. So here I'm going to get my jump animation and plug that in. And then I'm also going to go into my falling and I'm going to plug that in. So let's find for loop, and we're just going to make sure that falling is definitely set to loop because we want it to keep on looping. I'm just going to expose this pin just so you can see that I want it to keep on falling. But our jump animation, we don't want that one to loop because we want to play it once, and once we've finished, we want to go directly into falling. Now, how do we get values that can allow us to get from here to here? Well, what we're going to need to do is go into our event graph and actually get some more values here from our character to know, are they in the air? Now, this is where we got our character movement component before, so you could get the character reference and then get the character movement out of them. I'm just going to get my character movement that I saved, and inside of every character movement we have a value called is falling. So we can know, is our character currently falling through the air? They're not colliding with something underneath them and they are dropping downwards. So here I'm going to promote this to the variable and I'm going to say is in air, and I'm going to connect that up. So every frame we can just be checking and saying, are we in the air? And now that can be useful because I can use that to start determining how I go from here to here. Now, it previously used to be with Unreal, if you wanted to do this in an animation blueprint, you'd have to start putting these transition rules in here. You'd have to say, okay, how do I go from ground locomotion into jump start? How do I go from ground locomotion into falling? And we'd end up with lots and lots of arrows because this arrow would be here, this arrow would be here. We'd also have arrows potentially from crouching to falling and prone to falling and all sorts of different things. Now, there's a really useful thing that came in around about Unreal 5.1, 5.2, which is these state aliases. And basically, these are a connection that we can add. So you can see here to jump. I'm not actually going to connect anything directly to that like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is essentially connected to that ground locomotion. So that is the same as having a line between them. And then that line between them can then be split by having new connections come out from there. So I'm saying I'm going to be able to go from here into here, and depending on what these transition rules, that will determine whether I go into jump start or whether I go into falling. Okay, so how do we go into jump start? Well, jump start is going to be a very easy one. Actually, let's do the falling first. Falling's going to be super easy. We'll go with is in air, yeah, because we just want to say, are we in the air? If we are in the air, if that is true, then we are falling. And let's just have a look. That error is coming because we don't have anything here. So let's go and have a look at the other side. And this other side for the jump start is going to be, are we in the air? So we need to have a is in air. But we might also need a little bit more value here, because if this is in the air and this is in the air, how does it know which one of these is the priority that it should go through? We do have a priority order. But are there any other values and variables that we can start thinking about to determine our transition rule from one to the other? So what I'm going to do here in this one is I'm going to say, am I in the air? And, so we can go with an and bool. So we get an and boolean. which requires both of these booleans to be true. We say, am I in the air, and is my character velocity? Now, at the moment, we haven't saved our velocity, so we could drag our character reference in and get velocity again. Or if we think about it over here, we've already got our velocity. So we could, again, promote this to a variable, call this velocity, plug it in here, and now we can keep on reusing that elsewhere because it's saved as a variable for us. So now I could just get that velocity value. I'm going to drag off and break it because I want to know the X, the Y, and the Z separately. Do I need all of them? No, because I'm going up and down, so I only need the Z value. And the Z value, I'm going to say, is this Z value greater than? I'm just going to put in a value like 100 just for testing for now. So am I being pushed up at a velocity of 100 or over 100? And am I currently in the air? If I am, then I go into jump. If not, so when it's coming and making these decisions, if not, I'm going to go into falling. Now, it might be that your falling has a bit of a problem here and it doesn't like having to have both of this. Maybe it defaults to this one as the priority. So you could mess around with those priority values for the transition, or you could go into here and you could just take what we've already done here. So I'm just going to take all of this stuff that's in here and put it in this one. But instead of greater than, let's just go with the opposite and just say less than or equal to. And that means that, and we could just do 100, but probably 0 or less is going to be fine here. And that means that I can just be, for every other eventuality, go the opposite direction. Okay, so we've got no errors there. So let's press play. If I jump, I go into the jump, I go into the falling, but nothing obviously tells it that it can go from falling back into idle, walk and run. Let's just test it again, but this time let's go and drop. So I drop down, not enough of a drop there. Let's go up high, and if we drop, nothing's telling it to go back to the idle, walk and run. And because nothing's telling it to go back to the idle, walk and run, you think about this and go back to here. Let's go back into that one. Because nothing tells it to go back into here, nothing can tell it to go back into here because this is only connected to ground locomotion. There's no connection that allows falling to go back into jump. So we have to start thinking now of how we can go from here back into that one. Now that one is going to be using our landing animations. So let's go and actually add our landing animation in now to allow us to go from this options or either of these options here back into ground locomotion. Okay, so let's now add our landing. Now for this, I don't know when my falling is going to end, so I could have this come off of here, go into a landing state and then have the state go down to there. But I prefer to use these state aliases to disconnect that, and let's just have a to landing state alias. So that means that I can then use that to connect up to jump start and to falling, because maybe I land before I finished my jump. Maybe it's a very short jump and something lands underneath me or moves underneath me that causes me to collide before I start moving down. So now they're essentially connected to this, and then I'll have a new state, so just a generic state, and we'll call this one landing, because obviously this is to landing. Let's connect those to each other and we'll say, okay, well, at this point, if these were connected to here, what would be the thing that would allow me to go from here to here? Well, that would be if I'm in the air, but I don't actually want to be in the air anymore. So I would say a not ball. So I'll say if this is not true. And so we've got those. And if either of these, or if we're in either of these states and we're not in the air anymore, that'll connect to here, which will take us to landing. Let's plug our landing animation in, and we're going to come back and actually edit this in a moment because I want to improve this further. And now we can go, well, from landing, let's go over and say, how do we go from landing to moving? Well, let's do a get time remaining, and we'll use get time remaining fraction. Say if it is less than or equal to 0.2. So we'll just go with 2 for the 20% for now. And compile that, and that's allowing me to go from here into the state alias, which will say, am I not in the air anymore? If so, play the landing animation. When the landing animation finishes, let's go back into our ground locomotion. So we come over to here, we press play and jump. We've got a jump, we go into land, and we actually play our landing animation. If I was to jump here, you can see I loop in the falling animation, and when I land, I do press land, but notice as I'm moving around, it's going to keep on playing the landing animation. So even though I'm now in idle, walk or run, it's still finishing the whole of the land animation before it will go back to idle, walk, run animation that's been determined by the blend space. So that's what we're going to fix next. We're going to look at how we can actually edit that. And that's only come about because of our retargeter and the way that it's just retargeted things generally into just normal animations. So we're going to have a look at editing some of those animations just so we can start blending them together with each other. So now I'm here inside of our animation blueprint and I'm looking at our character, and you can see here we have this landing state. Inside of the landing state, we're playing our land animation. So you can see it over here in our asset browser. That's the one that's playing. But obviously if I was to open that up, you can see it here. It will play through the whole of these 26 frames, or at least until 20% of it is left, and then it will blend back into our idle, walk, run. But obviously that means that we're getting that kind of movement, and we want to think, how can we actually get it to blend in with the idle, walk, run so it becomes like a seamless transition? Now if we have a look at our one, we've got this brown node, and we've seen these with all of these other nodes that we've been adding in, the idles, the run, all of them have this kind of browny red node. But if we actually went and looked inside of the Mani animation blueprint, we'd see that landing here is this green node. And these green ones are essentially animations that have been defined or told to be additive, which means they can be added over the top and used as a blending with another animation. Now, obviously right here, I haven't got that. So what I need to do is I need to go into this landing animation and I need to set some of the properties on there. Now the first one I'm going to go and set is go down to the additive settings. So you can see here, scroll down my asset details, go down to additive settings, and right now it's set to no additive. That's why it's coming up as the brown node. If I tick that, I can choose to do it in the local space or the mesh space. And I'm going to choose local space for this animation. You will see that it will turn around, and we'll change this from skeleton reference pose. Instead, we're going to use a pose from inside of the animation. So we're going to use the selected animation frame. And in this instance here, we can actually say, sorry, not that one. Let's use the frame from this animation. And we can just say, let's use 26. We're going to use the last frame. Whatever it ends on, that's the frame that we're going to use. Now, it might be that when you've actually turned this on, it might be that you see your character start lying on the floor or facing downwards. And in that instance, you might want to just have a play at, you can see here, just turning on or off the root motion. And also we've got this enable force root lock. So playing around with those, we can see that that will now obviously fix it so our character is standing upright. So that's all saved. Let's go back over here, and immediately it has updated. Well, that's perfect because now we've got the green node that we already had. So let's just test that and see what that has done. Yeah, so we've got our idle, our walk, and we should have a run. There we go, run's there. We can jump, and when we land, our character disappears and comes back. Now that is because we're applying an additive animation onto nothing. So we're adding it to 0 and we're ending up with 0. So our character just blends away into tiny nothing, or sometimes it blends up and goes massive for a moment and then blends back down. So what we need to do is we need to look at exactly what the Mani one here is doing. We need to say, how can I take this animation and blend it? So I need to be blending and saying, as I go from here into here, I want to take this animation and apply it onto the one I'm going into. And we know that this one here is that ground loco pose. Yeah, you can see it going here. This is that cached pose from previous videos where we cached the blend space of idle, walk, and run into one cached pose. So I'm going to take this here, and the node we're looking for is this apply additive. And we're going to say, let's take a pose that we already have, a cached pose that we've saved, and we're going to apply an additive animation over the top of it. So let's just search for that. Apply additive. This one obviously is the additive animation, so it's going to go into the additive option there. And here we want to have that cached pose. So in my instance, it's called that ground locomotion. So I can go search for use cached pose ground loco pose. And if I apply that, now it's going to take whatever animation I'm going into and apply this one on top of it. So it's going to add that and combine them. And you can see now I blend into idle. But if I also walk, I'm going to land into a walk. Okay, so that concludes our animation blueprint process for now. We've got something very similar to the Manny and Quinn, where we have idle, walk, run. We can obviously play around with that blend space and the different values for transitioning. We've got our jump animation, which goes into landing and fall. And obviously we've also got falling if we were to fall off a block to land back down. Now, there are other animations we might want to have. You can see, obviously, there's characters over here with pistols. The one up on the hill over there has a rifle. Maybe you want to look at equivalencies that you might have in your asset pack. Maybe you look for idle with a sword or idle with a pistol or a rifle, but still follow the same process. You are changing the idle animations, the walk, the run, the jumping, and just getting them to match up. And doing that, we should be able to get a basic locomotion system applied to our character. In future videos, we'll look at how we can get these one-off animations like aiming, like firing, interacting, and things like that into our character. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.